can science go too far in the name of understanding human behavior? Throughout history, psychologists have conducted experiments to unlock the secrets of the human mind. But some of those experiments didn't just reveal startling truths. They exposed how easily ethics can be sacrificed. Participants were traumatized, lives were changed, and in some cases, humanity itself was pushed to the edge. Welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the most fascinating and sometimes disturbing corners of human knowledge. Today's topic is both riveting and unsettling. Psychological experiments that went horribly wrong. While many of these studies were initially designed to better understand learning, obedience, group dynamics, and emotion, they instead became cautionary tales. These weren't just academic exercises, they were real-life stories that forced the scientific community to reconsider what research should allow. In this video, we'll explore 10 psychological experiments that crossed the line, leaving a trail of ethical violations, emotional damage, and public outrage. Stick around until the end because each experiment reveals something more disturbing than the last. Let's begin. The Stanford Prison Experiment, 1971, conducted by Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University. This experiment aimed to investigate how individuals conform to roles of power and submission. 24 male students were randomly assigned to be either prisoners or guards in a simulated prison environment. But what began as a role play quickly turned into a psychological nightmare. The guards grew increasingly abusive, subjecting the prisoners to emotional humiliation, punishments, and even solitary confinement. The prisoners experienced breakdowns, stress, and depression. Zimbardo, acting as the prison superintendent, failed to intervene until day 6, although the experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. This study is now infamous for demonstrating how quickly ordinary people can commit terrible acts when given authority and no accountability. The Mgrim Obedience Experiment, 1961. Psychologist Stanley Mgrim wanted to understand how far people would go in obeying authority, especially when it involved hurting others. Participants were instructed to administer electric shocks to a learner, an actor, whenever they answered questions incorrectly. With each mistake, the voltage increased. Even as the learner screamed in pain and begged for the experiment to stop, the participants continued delivering shocks, simply because the experimenter told them to. Although no real shocks were delivered, participants didn't know that. Many were left emotionally shaken, believing they had caused real harm. The experiment revealed a chilling truth. Ordinary people are capable of obedience even when it violates their conscience. The Monster Study, 1939. This lesser-known experiment was conducted by Dr. Wendell Johnson at the University of Iowa. It involved 22 orphan children, divided into 2 groups. One group was given positive speech therapy and encouragement, while the other was constantly belittled and criticized, even when they spoke correctly. The goal was to understand stuttering, but the outcome was devastating. Children in the negative feedback group developed speech problems and emotional trauma that lasted for years. The experiment, nicknamed the Monster Study, was so controversial that its existence was hidden for decades. It stands as a horrifying reminder of what happens when vulnerable populations are treated as test subjects. The Little Albert Experiment, 1920. John B. Watson and his assistant Rosalie Rayner conducted a study on classical conditioning using a baby named Albert. Initially, Albert showed no fear of animals, but the researchers began pairing a loud, frightening noise with the presence of a white rat. Soon, Albert developed a strong fear of the rat, and eventually anything white and fluffy, including rabbits and even Santa Claus masks. The worst part? Albert was never desensitized or treated for the trauma. The experiment left lasting psychological scars, and to this day, it raises major ethical concerns about experimenting on infants without consent or follow-up care. The David Rymer case, 1960s-1990s. This tragic case wasn't just an experiment. It was a life-altering decision made by psychologist Dr. John Money. David Rymer was born a boy, but suffered a botched circumcision. Dr. Money convinced his parents to raise him as a girl, Brenda, claiming gender identity was purely a social construct. The child underwent hormone treatments and was raised as female, but never truly identified as a girl. The emotional toll was severe. David eventually transitioned back to living as a male, but struggled with depression and trauma for years. He later took his own life. This case exposed the dangers of imposing theories on unwilling subjects and ignoring their lived experiences. The Aversion Project, 1970s-1980s. In apartheid-era South Africa, military psychologist Dr. Aubrey Levin ran a series of brutal conversion experiments on homosexual conscripts. These young men were subjected to chemical castration, electroshock therapy, and even forced sex reassignment surgeries, all in an attempt to cure them. Thousands were affected by the program, many of whom were sent to psychiatric wards, without due process. The project was not only unethical, it was a human rights violation masquerading as science. It wasn't until years later that the truth came to light, and the experiment was widely condemned internationally. The Landis Facial Expression Experiment, 1924. At the University of Minnesota, researcher Carney Landis wanted to determine whether people expressed emotions with universal facial expressions. He asked participants to perform various tasks, including smelling ammonia and watching pornographic material. But the most disturbing part came when participants were told to decapitate a live rat. Most refused at first, but under pressure, a large number complied, despite being deeply disturbed. The study offered little scientific insight but caused significant emotional distress. It remains a prime example of how far researchers can push boundaries in pursuit of flawed ideas. The Well of Despair, 1960s. Psychologist Harry Harlow, known for his work on maternal attachment, conducted a series of brutal experiments on rhesus monkeys. In his Well of Despair study, baby monkeys were isolated in dark chambers for months at a time. Deprived of social interaction, many became psychotic, rocking endlessly, refusing food, or mutilating themselves. Some never recovered. Harlow's work, while foundational in understanding attachment and neglect, is now considered grotesquely inhumane. His research sparked major changes in how animal testing is regulated and raised important questions about the cost of scientific discovery. MK-Ultra, 1950s-1970s. MK-Ultra was a top-secret CIA project aimed at exploring mind control techniques. The experiments included giving LSD and other drugs to unsuspecting civilians, prisoners, and even government employees, all without their consent. Participants suffered hallucinations, psychological breakdowns, and in some cases, death. Goal was to develop interrogation techniques, but it crossed every imaginable ethical line. Many of the records were destroyed, and the full scope may never be known. What is clear is that MK-Ultra was not science. It was state-sponsored abuse carried out under the guise of national security. The Robbers Cave Experiment, 1954. Social psychologist Muzaffar Sharif wanted to study intergroup conflict and cooperation. He brought two groups of 11-year-old boys to a summer camp, separating them and fostering rivalry through competition. As tensions rose, the boys began to vandalize property, hoard resources, and even engage in physical violence. Sharif then attempted to bring the groups together through shared goals. While the experiment did reveal important insights into group dynamics and conflict resolution, it did so by manipulating children into aggressive behavior. Without their informed consent or understanding of the setup, it was ethically questionable, particularly given the emotional intensity it generated in young participants. Psychological research has undoubtedly contributed to our understanding of human nature. But some of these experiments show just how dangerous unchecked curiosity can be. Many of these studies were conducted before modern ethical guidelines were in place. Today, informed consent, debriefing, and the right to withdraw are standard. But these dark chapters remind us that science must always be balanced with humanity. If you found this video thought-provoking, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We post deep dives into fascinating, controversial, and sometimes unsettling topics every week. Hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next one, and stay curious but always stay ethical. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.